Hello, class. This series of videos will concentrate more on the basic stamp memory, and also it will cover some information about signals. I would like to start off by reading 3 sentences and then trying to explain the meaning of each. The first sentence is, programming means the processing of numbers that represents values, conditions, states in the outside world. Processing means that it does the kinds of things that you learned about in your math class, which includes adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, but it also includes additional physical things such as moving numbers, increasing numbers, decreasing numbers, shifting the position of numbers, and many, many other additional things such as storing numbers, reading and writing numbers. But be mindful that everything that's done in a computer is done on some type of number. Now, when we say that it represents, yes, when we push a button, we assume the button has 2 states, and then we change those states into numbers that we can use in our program. We may decide that when the button is pressed, that represents a 1, and when the button is not pressed, it represents a 0. Moving on to the next sentence. Numbers come in 5 basic sizes in a computer system, and here they are. However, for the Basic Stamp microcontroller, only these 4 are available. This is not available in the microcontroller because it's a very big number, and you use those in bigger computers. The third statement is using symbols, statements, expressions, commands, and words in a logical order, control problems can be solved. This is the meaning of programming. First, you have to learn the language of the program, and then you must put that in some type of logical order and use that order to control a problem. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that you have to think like a microcontroller. And I've said this many times. Think like a microcontroller. Well, again, microcontroller can only do things with numbers. And you must think like a microcontroller. Microcontroller cannot read temperature. It can only read a value that's connected to one of its pins. You understand that the number that's being given to the microcontroller represents temperature, but it's not actual temperature it's reading. It's a representation. So you must make that connection between what your numbers represent in your microcontroller. And there are many representations inside the microcontroller. And sometimes when you're writing your program, you can get a little confused. So once again, the Basic Stamp has 4 options, and depending upon what you want to represent, you will decide to manage your memory. Now, to hold the value within the microcontroller, you must learn the idea of variables. You learned about variables in algebra. What is a variable? A variable is just basically a box that can hold a number. And the box has a name, such as x. Now, if we define the variable x to represent a bit, then x can only have 2 values, 0 and 1. But if we decide that we want x to represent a nibble, then it can represent any number between 0 and 15. Why is this? Simple. A nibble is 4 bits, and 2 to the power of 4 is equal to 16. Starting at 0 and counting up to 15 different numbers. You've seen this table many times. Here, I show you specifically what those numbers are in binary and how those numbers are represented in decimal. So in the microcontroller, you must define variables that you plan to use that will represent many different things in your program. And you must decide how big it must be depending upon what it represents. Your program will consist of codes, variables, and various parameters. These are what we call the options that are available for a particular command. These are your options. A very, very useful thing in your microcontroller is the help. It almost gives you a total summary of what your microcontroller is all about. It talks about commands. It talks about different operators that you can use. And here are some of the operators. It gives you an idea how your microcontroller's memory is organized. And here is a summary table of all the memory that's available on your microcontroller. It talks about variables and how to create them, and constants, numbers that do not change in your microcontroller. It even has special information about how to define pins and some additional compiler information. It even have a table, an ASCII table, where it defines the codes that represent the symbols that you might use on a keypad. Also, it tells you some special words that only you can use in your basic stamp, and you cannot use those as variables. For example, the return word, that's part of a command, so you can't define a variable with this name. The microcontroller will become confused. What do you mean? Do you want this to mean return from a subroutine, or do you want this to be a variable? So you must only use words when defining variables that are not reserved. And here in the last section, it even gives you some additional information about how to use the PBasic programming language. Thank you.